Welcome to the Centre for Brexit Studies YouTube channel. I'm joined by Senior Fellow Dr. Stephen McCabe today. So Steve, this morning Jeremy Corbyn has said he has uncensored documents showing that the US is demanding the NHS on the table in a trade deal. Do you think this is a game changer for the Labour Party?
Well, again, just to be clear, what seems to be sort of happening, according to sort of what I've seen of this document as far, which is pretty superficial, is just about patents and drugs and the sort of again, I was just listening to some of the comparisons of the sort of the amounts charged in America for drugs compared to this country, and it is phenomenally more expensive. Therefore, of course, is this the NHS up for sale? Well, of course, Johnson would claim it's not, but nonetheless, this is about sort of an American farmer trying to make inroads into this country. Now, of course, this is sensational stuff. Now, is it a game changer? Well, in normal circumstances, it would be, but hey, this is a Brexit election and all sorts of peculiar things are going on. And I suspect it'll shift the debate, but yeah, again, you have to sort of give Johnson grudging credit for the fact that he seems to be sort of made of Teflon. It'll be deflected, and I suspect it won't make the sort of the amount of difference it perhaps should do. And let's face it, of course, Jeremy Corbyn has got his own problems, and indeed, even at the press conference this morning, he was asked about the anti-Semitism thing. So, this kind of haunts and sort of it really has poisoned a lot of the sort of debate. But as I say, this is a very peculiar election. And I don't doubt that there may be a few other shocks in the sort of the next 2 weeks leading up to the election. But nonetheless, in normal circumstances, this should be sort of something which makes people sit up and think, who do I want to vote for, and what are the sort of the long-term implications of so doing?
So tomorrow, the leaders of Labour, Lib Dem, Green and SNP will go head-to-head in a debate on climate change on Channel 4. How important is climate change in this election, and do you think this could let the Tories down?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you remember back a number of years ago, David Cameron, when he was running for sort of the leadership of the Conservatives, I know that's a long time ago indeed. He talked about sort of having sort of the greenest Conservatives ever. So it's something which, of course, I know that they're vulnerable about, and people are aware of the sort of the need for climate change. The difficulty I think it comes to, I accept that sort of how much pain are willing to sort of people willing to sort of to undergo to do this. How much are they willing to pay in terms of going to sort of green cars, for instance, because that is going to make a massive change in sort of the forthcoming years. Are they willing to pay more for energy? Recycling, have we done enough of that? So I think that there are big issues here. Personally speaking, I don't think it's got the sort of the amount of traction. It's not the sort of the issue, I'm sure, that sort of politicians have to deal with on the sort of the doorstep. And if we look at the sort of Labour Party manifesto, and many people have, of course, and have looked at the sort of particular implications of that, the sort of things that are being suggested, I mean, it has huge ramifications in terms of, sort of job creation and investment in the green economy. But of course, it's all kind of got a bit lost in the sort of the big numbers. And I don't know, people, I still sense that sort of, Radio 4 this week have been reporting from the sort of the Antarctic. Martha Carter's up there, and she's saying that or reporting on the fact that it's the sort of the middle of their summer, although their summer is very different to ours. But they're experiencing peculiar atmospheric conditions. This has implications way beyond the sort of this generation. And if we don't do something now, we'll have reached the tipping point. Some argue we already have done. I think it should have greater prominence, but it's difficult in this so-called Brexit election. It's kind of got lost.
So, of course, one of the biggest changes in next month's election is that many young people who were too young to vote in the EU referendum are now obviously able to vote. What impact do you think this could have?
Well, potentially the younger people have a greater propensity, well, firstly, don't tend to vote, but I don't think they have been motivated to do so. And indeed, the number of sort of people who are registering, which is mainly young people, is increasing vastly, something like sort of 3.2 million, I believe, since the sort of the election was called not that many weeks ago. So if we look upon the sort of the generality of this, that they have a greater sort of willingness to vote for Labour, Greens, the Lib Dems, then, and in the sort of numbers we're talking about, this could significantly shape the sort of the outcome of the election, and indeed, particularly of course because it all depends upon distribution. If these people are registering or sort of going to vote in sort of metropolitan areas where there are established candidates, and of course not much is going to change, it probably won't make that much difference where somebody's got a huge majority. But nonetheless, in sort of the last election, it's very notable. Okay, it was only 2017. That 80% of constituencies had the characteristic of the winning margin was less than sort of the number of people who did not vote who registered. So of course, if you have these people who are motivated to so do, and they vote in one way or another, we can't sort of predict that, then yeah, it could have a very dramatic effect. But the reality is that the first past the post system we've got, it depends on a relatively small number of people in key constituencies shifting the balance. But it's a good thing. I mean, let's face it, the more that everyone, particularly young people, can be sort of incentivised and encouraged to vote, the better, because of course it is our democratic right, and we then have to live with the consequences for the next 5 years.
So could the deciders of this election result then be the students and the young people rather than the older generations?
Well, again, if we look at the outcome of the referendum in 2016, again, there was a very sort of clear trend of older people were those who were more willing to sort of vote to sort of leave, as opposed to sort of young people who did not. And again, allied to that, to the fact that sort of young people do not tend to vote in as greater numbers, then yeah, I mean, as I say, if they get out and do this, then of course that could have a significant effect. And of course the other thing is that this is an election being held within a couple of weeks of the longest day, the shortest day of the year, to be absolutely correct. So of course it's dark from sort of 3:30, 4:45 onwards. And there is a view, although I don't put too much sort of first stock in this, that sort of older people don't tend to go out during the winter. This is why you have elections during the summer. Younger people are much less fearful of that. So yeah, who knows? It's going to be interesting. Turnout will be significant, and of course there's a proportion of votes across the constituencies. And I know a question you're going to ask is, what will be the outcome? Well, that's difficult, but as I say, what would be great to see is as close to 100% turnout as possible. I know it's probably never going to be achieved, but it's an aspiration which is good to have.
So how likely do you think another coalition government could be after this election?
Right, well, I mean, a coalition involving the Conservatives become, say for instance, the largest party but don't have an overall majority. It's very difficult to see who they could do a deal with. Certainly not the SNP, certainly not Labour. That is inconceivable, quite clearly. The Liberal Democrats, they're making peculiar noises. I wouldn't rule that out. It would be interesting. Clearly, the DUP would have been the natural sort of allies, but of course they're not going to sort of, their price will be to jettison the customs border down the RSC. So and that I think would be too much. So of course it's more likely if the Conservatives don't win, that you might have some sort of grand coalition of the Labour Party, SNP, Liberal Democrats, potentially even sort of the DUP, if they could be brought in. It's fanciful, and most people think it's probably not going to happen. And certainly, the biggest party in that coalition would be Labour, led by Jeremy Corbyn. I think that would be sort of too much for some to stomach. I think the SNP could go with it. The DUP have said they wouldn't. The Liberal Democrats have made it clear that they wouldn't. Would the Labour Party be willing to sort of to jettison Jeremy Corbyn? I don't know. These are hypothetical sort of situations, and it's very difficult to foresee. But hey, this is a really important election. I think the one thing I would add to all of that is though that those who voted for those parties, I'm talking about the grand coalition involving Labour, SNP, Lib Dems, and whoever. Would they then forgive the Labour Party if they didn't take the opportunity to stop the Brexit that will be coming if Johnson does win the election? These are interesting questions, and I'm sure that a lot of chat on the doorstep is based upon such scenarios.
So it's just over 2 weeks to head to the polling booths. Do you think this is the most important general election in decades? And what are you expecting from the final 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's probably the most important election since the Second World War, and of course we know that was an earthquake in the sense that sort of Clement Attlee won it against a sort of incumbent, a certain Winston Churchill, who only a couple of months previously had won the Second World War. With, of course, it was a coalition government, and that was on a very radical agenda. I don't think that is going to happen in this case. What am I predicting? The opinion polls suggest that sort of Johnson has, will probably win a majority, and that is the sense. But of course, that's what people were saying last time, and it didn't quite work out like that. If I was to have to put money, I would sort of say a very, very sort of slim majority by Johnson, maybe 10, 15, 20. But hey, I don't rule out the prospect that he doesn't quite sort of make it. And then, of course, that introduces a very, very sort of interesting scenario, as we've just been talking a moment ago, of who will then become the government. And of course, there's still the possibility that sort of the Grand Coalition, if you like, doesn't see, that falls apart at the sort of in the way that it did previously in the sort of the 2015 or in the aftermath of that, because Gordon Brown was seen as the sort of the price that would have to be paid by the Labour Party, or his departure. That then, a Conservative Party that's in a minority Conservative Party in government, it certainly would put a very different complexion upon the future, or the immediate future going forward. Would Johnson be able to sort of bring his bill, because he wouldn't have the majority to get it through? What would happen then at the end of January? There are huge risks to that, because of course then, if he managed to sort of cling on, we could still leave the EU by the end of January with no deal at all. So there are very, very big consequences to sort of the outcome of this election, and nobody's really going to sort of call it with absolute confidence. I think we'll probably know if it's anything like the last election a couple of minutes after 10 o'clock on the 12th of December from the sort of the exit polls. Because at the moment, let's face it, the opinion polls that exist are snapshots, and they are in large part notoriously unreliable.
Thanks for joining us, Steve.